Hello, my name is Laura Keenan, and I am the Governance and Management Consultant for the Vermont Department of Libraries. Thank you for joining me for this trustee training. My focus in this training is fundraising, both now during the time of COVID-19 and beyond. So when we think about fundraising, I like to start first with thinking about how do we establish a good working relationship with our friends group? Because if we have a friends group, they're also engaged in fundraising. So how do the trustees and the friends work together well to make sure that fundraising happens smoothly? In most cases, your friends group is separate from the library. They're their own separate 501c3. This may not be the case with all friends groups, but with most it is. And so it's important to remember that they've got their own bylaws and their own board and to respect that and to work with them in partnership in fundraising efforts. And as part of that partnership, I encourage you to establish a memorandum of understanding between the trustees and the friends, also known as an MOU, which clearly lays out roles and responsibilities of each group and how they work together and communicate. And it's important as part of that MOU to differentiate between the types of fundraising done by each group so that the public doesn't get confused and so that each group has a good sense of who does what, when, and why. And because the friends are engaged with the library and big library supporters, it's important for the trustees to engage the friends in strategic planning, and that includes in the strategic planning around fundraising. It's important to set up clear lines of open and honest communication so that you can work through issues together as boards and make sure that people are heard and understood. And it's also important to express sincere appreciation and gratitude for what the friends do in a way that feels like appreciation to them to nurture and maintain that relationship. So, having said that, fundraising in the time of COVID-19, should we be fundraising now? Now, I am not a fundraising expert. I want to clearly lay that out there. What I've learned from other fundraising experts that I've worked with personally, but also through attending lots of webinars by fundraising experts and learning from them, trying to soak in all that I could. And the short answer from everyone I've spoken to is yes, we should be fundraising now, even during a time when it may feel weird to do so because some people can't afford housing or can't afford food. It's important to remember that deep, meaningful fundraising is more than just about asking for money. It's also about creating connections and building relationships with our donors and helping them understand how their passions and their desires are fulfilled and met by the mission and the work of the library. Matching up their priorities with our priorities is part of that relationship building that comes before the ask, allowing them to see the impact of our work and how their money makes that possible as part of what we do. And so during this time of stress and the wildness of the world, it's important that we're not forgotten. They need to continue to know or continue to learn what it is we're doing for our communities despite these wild times. And they may be looking for a way to help their community, and you don't want them to forget about you. If the library is silent and not continuing to build relationships with fundraisers or funders, sorry, through fundraising, then your donors may look elsewhere to help their community when the library might be just as valid a place for them and might meet their goals and their aspirations better than some other organizations. And it's important during this time to continue to build these relationships with your donors. Express sincere gratitude for their support in the past, for their future support. Listen to them, ask for them for advice, keep in communication with them about what you're doing so that that relationship continues to be built upon and continues to grow over time. Now, one of the expert fundraisers whose webinar I went to recently, her name is Lori. She owns this place called Ignited Fundraising Online, and she has some great free resources on her website. She is a master storyteller, and her focus is how do you share meaningful stories of true impact of the work that your organization is doing. And one of the resources on the site that I've linked to here is called Boring to Brilliant, and it walks you through how to find good impact stories in your community from the people you serve and to transform those stories with their permission into something that'll be an impactful statement that you can share with donors and funders. And it teaches you how to do it yourself or how to encourage those folks to do it with you, the people whose stories you like to share. Another site I like to look for fundraising advice is a place called Bloomerang online, and they had an article recently. This will link to that article, but I found like this quote was very powerful. They said, choosing to stay silent through this crisis is a missed opportunity to develop deep, meaningful, lasting relationships with donors that can prove to be fulfilling. So it's important that this relationship building is important during this time of COVID-19 and beyond. And don't forget about your donors. So a couple things to remember or to think about when you're thinking about fundraising during COVID-19 is whether you're going to do stuff in person following safety guidelines and protocols, or if you're going to try to move things online or do things through the mail or through paid advertising. So if you're going to try to do things in person following safety protocols, you'll need to think about space. Do you have the space that's necessary to keep people socially distanced, to have whatever you're happening provide the right space between people, the right circulation of air, all that sort of thing. But you'll also need the right personnel to do it. Do you have people who are willing and able to do the in-person event? Will they be safe? And will you be able to protect them with the right personal protective equipment and cleaning supplies? So these are some things to think about. Or if you're going to move events or your efforts online or do it through letters, do you have the right technology to do that? Be that cameras, internet access, computer access. Do people that are helping you out have the right skills for whatever type of event that you're doing, either online or through letters or ads? And what is feasible? That's always the big thing with me. Given the restrictions of your board and your community, is what you're thinking about doing feasible? So there are lots of different fundraising types, and it's important to think about what types are needed for what you want to do for your community, for your long range strategic planning in terms of funding. And so there are things like annual campaigns. If you're thinking about sending out letters annually to raise money for the library, a lot of libraries do that. If you've never done it in the past, it's worth looking into. There's one-on-one donor development, which is really important for the strategic long-range financial viability of your library. And that happens well before people oftentimes give, making sure that you're building those relationships. Capital campaign if you need to bring your library up to ADA standards, or if you have major renovations you need to do. An endowment drive. If you don't have an endowment, how can you work on creating one to support your library during rainy days or for other purposes? Or if you have an endowment, how can you continue to build that up? Bequests and planned giving is something that I highly encourage library trustees to look into, especially if you've never done so before. There may be people in your community who would love to put you in their will or to plan to give the library something over time. And there are lots of organizations in Vermont that do this very skillfully, and the library can learn from that. Book sales, we're used to those. Some sort of event that can raise money, you can continue to think about how you could do these online. And then, of course, grants and other funding sources that you can investigate as a board. Take a slight detour here and talk a little bit about bequests, endowments, and other large monetary gifts, because these are a little special subsection that I'm encouraging boards to think about. They are important to show that you are responsible stewards of funds for the future viability of the library, so that you are building up funds for long-term investment or long-term needs of the library that you're not dependent on for basic operating costs, but you really are building up a sort of a buffer fund, safety fund. I encourage you, as you're doing this, to work with a financial advisor, either a for-profit or a nonprofit advisor, to help guide you through the legal implications and the ins and outs of this. There are many organizations that can help you with this. As a state worker, I can't promote just one organization in particular, but there is one that many libraries work with that many other libraries don't know about, and it's the Vermont Community Foundation. They are a nonprofit organization that has a designated funds option, but they can also, if you've got donors who are thinking about setting up bequests or long-term gifts for the library, they'll work with those folks for free. And they, like I said, they work with many libraries. So I oftentimes get the question, why does the library need a gift acceptance policy? Why can't we just sort of have a general statement where here we'll accept gifts? Well, the main thing is to protect the library. Basically, you want to make sure that you protect against legal liabilities. so that you don't get any undesired restrictions that make it so that your gift is impossible to use over time or puts an undue burden on the library or has any unforeseen consequences. Again, you want to think through these things so that you don't inadvertently find yourself in a situation where the library is burdened because you agreed to do something for a gift that over time doesn't make sense in the best interest of the library. But also to set up the library to succeed in the future, making sure that moving forward, the library is consistent for donors and establishes guidelines so people who are thinking about giving to the library have a clear set of guidelines to follow and that decisions are made consistently over time. And honestly, because donors, especially those giving large gifts, expect that the places they're giving will have these gift acceptance policies set up and are prepared to accept funds. Some fundraising essentials, again, I've learned these over time. Um, do you need a fundraising consultant? It may depend on what type of fundraising you're going to do. If the type of fundraising you're going to do requires a feasibility study, like if you're thinking about doing a capital campaign or an endowment drive, it may be worth hiring someone to do that feasibility and the follow-up work that is required. But it's also important for you to make sure that you're set up to fundraise before you engage on fundraising activities with that gift acceptance policy, with the appropriate accounts established to be able to accept money of different types, with a good record keeping established that can really prove the money coming in and how it's being spent, especially if it's coming in for specific projects so you can track that it's being used that way. A donor management system, I encourage you to think about, again, depending on the type of fundraising you're doing, going beyond a simple Excel spreadsheet or a Word document, but to an actual system that you can subscribe to that can really help you track who's given over time, which campaigns that are given to, and also what you're learning about your donors over time. Because remember, fundraising is a lot about donor development and relationship building. And so you want to keep track about what it is that you're learning about people so you can honor that. And then making sure you have a clear and inspiring statement of need. Why are you raising funds? What are you raising them for? What is the impact of all of that? So that people feel inspired to give and know that you have a purpose for why you're asking for this money. So as you're thinking about fundraising, some questions to consider. Again, I come back to the feasibility thing. What is worth the effort? Which method are you going to use to fundraise? And is it worth it given the capacity of your board and your volunteers in your library and the capacity of your community? There may be other things, other fundraising efforts going on in your community. So it's important to know that context and to know how the library fits into that context. And also think about what is your overall strategy for the type of fundraising you're going to do and how does that fit into everything else that the library is doing. And then make sure that you build up a good leadership team, depending again on how you're fundraising, and make sure you delineate the roles that you need for that and train folks to that. And there are many different types of roles as you see on this slide, each one of which needs a different set of skills. And you may have people on your board who would be better at certain types of roles than others and honoring that. So now that I've gone over all these basics, I have some ideas I've gathered over the past few months that I wanted to share with you. Hopefully they'll inspire you as you think about how to fundraise during this wild time. Online fundraising is something that a lot of libraries and nonprofits are trying. So especially if you want to do a gala or you have a kickoff event for a capital campaign or some sort of in-person event that you usually do, if you're thinking about moving it online, I've learned some tips from other folks that I wanted to share with you. A big one is having a written out communication plan, because it's important if you're going to have an online event that you generate excitement for that event. So with your communication plan, you should really lay out what you're going to communicate to attendees and potential attendees months, weeks, days in advance of the event, on the event itself to maintain excitement that day throughout the event, and then afterwards. How are you going to follow up with people? How are you going to encourage them to follow through with their donations? That sort of thing. As part of your event, you want to make sure that you review the impact of the library's work in a way that'll tug at the heartstrings and inspire people to give, inspire them to celebrate the work that you're doing and how they contribute to it. And then don't forget, someone needs to tell their story to put a human face on the impact of the work that the library does. And I bring you back to that Ignited fundraising site that I showed earlier with some free resources. Making sure you plan out what your library's ask will be. You know, what are you that you're asking donors to do in terms of giving, in terms of action, and being sure to communicate that during your event. thinking about how you build community during that event. We're used to events building community because we're bringing people together physically. If you're doing it online, how can you bring people together not physically, but still help the participants feel like they're building community and participating in the event? If it's a chat, if it's polls, or if you have some other way of inspiring that. One example that I heard about that I really liked was a nonprofit sent each registrant for the event a red envelope with a sticker that said, "Do not open until date of event." And at the event, at a specific time, they encouraged everyone to open up their envelope at the same time. So everyone attending was opening their envelope at once, and inside was a gift to them and a call to action for them. And so it was a way to really help people feel like they were part of building something in the moment. And also remember, with an event, you're going to have to manage the event somehow and all the technology. And to really practice that, understand the technology you need and the skills and the roles for running that event. So another idea that's becoming really popular is this read at home or stay home and read type fundraisers. And I've seen many libraries do this. I really like this idea because it really marries the idea of libraries and reading, but it also helps build community because you have an event where even though people are in their separate homes reading, they've joined an event together and they're all reading in raising funds for the library and participating in a whimsical event. And it's important to think about how can we create some whimsy and some fun in this idea of people staying home and reading rather than gathering together at an event. And to think about donation categories that people can sign up for that they find fun and inspiring and can help relate to your theme. For instance, I've seen one library did this, "Oh, the places you won't go" fundraiser that goes off of Dr. Seuss's "Oh, the Places You'll Go." And so everything was sort of Seussical in the theme and the graphics and everything. There's also the Long Beach Public Library did this Grape Expectations fundraiser where everything was wine themed. There's a book ball done out in LA where they talk about different clothes that you could wear in your home. And then Vermont's Manchester Community Library, where this graphic is from on this slide, this is a link to the Stay Home and Read fundraiser that they did. And I encourage you again to think of donation categories that will inspire people. Like, I'd love to join you at the Metropolitan Art Gala, but I can't because I must stay home at my table and look at the fabulous art for my children on my refrigerator. Donation $50. Or I'd love to join you at the restaurant for a fancy dinner, but I must stay home and enjoy my gourmet mac and cheese. Donation $25, something like that. You may also want to try some sort of online sales event or auction, maybe on Facebook Live or some other format. Some libraries and friends groups are trying this, where basically the viewers bid on numbered books displayed during the event. So the auctioneer or the friends group member will hold up a book and say, "Lot number 25 has these different items in it," and sort of really hand sell it and highlight different resources that might be overlooked in a regular book sale because there's so many books to look at. And maybe the first person who comments "sold" and that number wins the item, and then you arrange how to get the money from them and how to get them the book. This is a link to an example of that was recorded on Facebook Live that you can still watch to see someone doing it in action. Now, I recently attended a webinar by Ed Rossman, who wrote a book on out-of-the-box thinking with library fundraising, which is available in our professional collection at the Department of Libraries, and you can take it out through interlibrary loan. And he really had some out-of-the-box thinking around new types of fundraising. His whole thing was that, our traditional types of fundraising we might not be able to do anymore. So here are some new things that may inspire you. He was big on self-publishing. So thinking about, is there something in your community that you can document and self-publish and then sell as a fundraiser through Ingram Spark, for instance? And that's what this link leads to. Like the COVID-19 changes, or in the past, Waterbury did something with Tropical Storm Irene and how that changed their community. An idea to think about. Amazon Smile, where you set up your 501c3 on Amazon Smile and then tell all your patrons you've done that. So when they go in to shop on Amazon, they pick your 501c3 as their beneficiary and a small percentage of their eligible purchases gets funneled to you. You could think about a crowdfunding fundraiser where you have goals and different rewards for levels of donations and a timeline that you're trying to meet. You can think about becoming an online gift shop affiliate with something like Cafe Press, where you sell items with the library's logo on it, and people can buy it off this site and you get a portion of that donated to the library, that cost. That way you don't have to keep all the swag at the library. You don't have to keep an inventory. It's kept at Cafe Press and you can put your logo on all sorts of different fun things. Think about partnering up with a local restaurant or chef to do a food night where maybe the percentage of profits from a takeout on one night is given to the library. Or maybe the chef creates a tasting menu that, as a fundraiser, and they put together some tasting items that people can purchase and bring home. And then you host a live event where everyone opens up their purchases together and the chef walks them through a tasting of that. Also think about people sponsoring a day or having naming rights to, when people create a new room in the library or do an expansion or renovation, oftentimes people can get a plaque if they donate a certain amount in that room. But maybe people can celebrate birthdays by sponsoring a day at the library. There are some fundraising laws, and you might want to seek out legal advice around some of these ideas. I'm not a lawyer. I can't give legal advice, but it's worth connecting with your legal counsel. So a few more virtual fundraising event examples. Uh, as a caveat for this, it's important to really point out that some of these things may look like regular library events. So if you're making them a fundraising event as opposed to a regular library event, make that very clear to your public so they know that this is not just a regular thing. TED Talk style events, a paint and craft night, maybe a wine tasting. There are some actual vendors who do wine tasting fundraising events, maybe a raffle, some sort of performance, or a murder mystery night that you conduct online. So a few more online fundraising resources. Some of you may have heard of TechSoup before. They work with nonprofits on tech and training. This first link here is a webinar they did, moving fundraising events online, which I found fairly helpful. There's a recording of that. And they have a web page on fundraising in the time of COVID-19 with a bunch of really helpful resources. Hopefully that presentation inspired you and got your creative juices flowing, thinking about how you can fundraise during this wild time. I encourage you to reach out to me, email, call, or invite me to visit you for a trustee training at some point. Thanks for joining me.